This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
It's February 17th, 2025, and I'm Cynthia Abrams. You're listening to a special President's Day edition of the Nashvillager podcast from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. There have been 3 presidents that hail from Tennessee, and they all left their distinctive marks on the executive branch. Andrew Jackson, Andrew Johnson, and James K. Polk all served in the 1800s, but their stories can still tell us something about Tennessee right now, and this political moment we're all living through. For today's episode, we're going to bring you 3 On This Day essays all about Tennessee's presidents and their influence. First up is the essay from August 9th, 2024. In it, our everyday host, Nina Cardona, explores Jackson's lasting legacy of Native American persecution.
An awful lot of Andrew Jackson's career was spent pushing Native groups out of the South, first through a series of military campaigns, then as president with the Indian Removal Act. He, and people like him, did a pretty complete job of it. I can't speak for how things ended up in other parts of the region, but here in Middle Tennessee, it's not just that the people were forced out. Much of the memory that they were ever even here was erased, too. And that fact is reflected in something that's happening right now. The Indigenous Peoples Coalition has asked the city to rename the park near the Titan Stadium at the eastern base of the pedestrian bridge. Right now, it's Cumberland Park, named for the river. The Indigenous group wants to change it to use the river's native name, Washioto. The etymology of that word sheds a pretty clear light on what's wrong with our collective misunderstanding of who used to be here. It doesn't come from the language of the Cherokee people who left here on the Trail of Tears. It's a Shawnee word, and it should be. Now, growing up, I was told by many adults that Native groups never really lived in the Nashville area, that this was just a huge hunting ground, a Cherokee hunting ground. To be fair, at the particular moment in the late 1700s when white settlement first began in Middle Tennessee, it was somewhat true. But that's because those settlers showed up during a kind of transitional period. But an earlier group of Europeans, the French fur traders, witnessed a whole different situation here. And I mention them because, come on, even if you're only going to believe the history written down by white folks, even that tells a richer story. They saw that the Shawnee people lived in villages all along the river in the early 18th century. The biggest one was where Nashville is now. That changed because of a war between the Shawnee and an alliance of Cherokee and Chickasaw, which partly erupted because of their conflicting relationships with various European colonist groups. The fighting dragged on a very long time. The dynamics of it all were complicated, but it was also documented. Like I said, it was known history if anyone wanted to ask around. But the big takeaway from this current situation with the name of the Metro Park is that the Shawnee people lived, not just hunted, but had houses, raised their babies, grew their food pretty darn close to the park that the Indigenous Peoples Coalition wants to rename. And those people called the river Washioto.
One quick update. Late last year, Metro officially renamed Cumberland Park to Washioto Park. For our second essay, Nina brings us the somewhat wild story of Andrew Johnson's inauguration. The essay is short, but it packs a punch. It's also the first time you'll be hearing this on your feed. This was part of the pilot for the podcast and was produced before our official launch. Here's Nina.
It's March 4th, 2024. On this day, in 1865, Tennessee's own Andrew Johnson was inaugurated as Vice President of the United States of America. And it was one for the history books for all the wrong reasons. To start with, Johnson was pretty sick. He had typhoid fever, which he self-medicated with booze. A lot of booze. According to first-person accounts, Johnson was sweaty and red-faced when he got to the Capitol. Custom at the time was for the VP to give a short speech. But once he got to the podium, Johnson went on and on and on, even though he had trouble even standing up straight at the podium. He rambled. He slurred his words. At one point, he waved a Bible in the air and gave it a messy kiss. Someone literally tried to pull Johnson away by grabbing his coat and giving it a yank, but he just kept going. Later on, when he was supposed to swear in new senators, the new VP was too disoriented to complete the task. About a month and a half later, Johnson became president, following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
The third and so far final Tennessee president is also the least well known. Even when he was running for office, James K. Polk was considered a dark horse and a surprise winner in the race, which makes this essay by Tony Gonzalez from November all the more interesting. Here's Tony.
It's November 4th, 2024. This puts us right in between a milestone from November 2nd and our November 5th election day arriving on Tuesday. It's fitting to tie these two together because over the weekend, November 2nd, was the birth date of James K. Polk, who became the nation's 11th president in a very interesting election. One of Polk's claims to presidential fame was how he won. His was a surprising or dark horse victory, considered by many as the first dark horse. It's the kind of tale that is fit for a song.
For Martin Van Buren, a former president and an abolitionist, James Buchanan, a moderate, Lewis Cass, a general and expansionist. From Nashville came a dark horse riding up. He was James K. Polk, Napoleon of the Stump.
Maybe not a hugely popular song, but a quality history lesson here from They Might Be Giants.
His oratory filled his foes with fear.
Polk won the presidency in 1845 largely on his support of annexing Texas. He went on to add a vast expanse of Western territory, and this also fueled the bitter battle that allowed the legal expansion of slavery at that time. Here's how former WPLN reporter and editor Chaz Sisk outlined Polk's broader legacy on NPR in 2017.
In his single term, Polk took control of the Southwest from Texas to California, established the Smithsonian Institution and the U.S. Naval Academy, and reorganized the Treasury and the postal system.
That reporting came at a time when Polk's remains had set off a different type of dispute. A movement was seeking to relocate his tomb from its unusual location on the grounds of the Tennessee state capitol.
Perhaps no president has had his remains fought over more than Polk. He passed away just months after leaving the White House, and from the beginning, his wishes were ignored. Because he died of cholera, he received a quick burial in a city cemetery for sanitary reasons. The next year, Sarah Polk insisted he be moved to their Nashville home, Polk Place, as stated in his will. He lay there until Sarah died in the 1890s. With no direct heirs, a judge divided the estate, leading to Polk Place's demolition and the tomb's relocation.
He is the only president buried on the grounds of a state capitol. But there was this push for years to move the tomb to the city of Columbia, where he'd lived. It was in 2018 that state lawmakers rejected this idea. That inspired the Tennessean to capture the moment with a story that opened with 5 artful words. May he rest in peace.
Thanks so much for listening, and happy President's Day. We'll be back with our usual format and Nina as your host tomorrow.